Hi, I'm Rob Byrne of Quest Software, which is now part of Dell. I'm a software pre-sales consultant, mostly working with the identity and security software products. In this video, I'm going to present one of our solutions which is designed to enhance native SharePoint security. It's called Quest One Authorization Policy Server for SharePoint. And it's based on some of the components of the Quest One stack, like the Authorization Policy Server, the Quest Secure Token Service, and also some specific integrations that have been done for SharePoint itself. Now, there are various components to the solution. The solution is based on some standards, technologies, and so on, which we'll briefly mention during the presentation. However, the goal of this presentation is to help sales and pre-sales to understand what the solution does, to identify the use cases where it will be helpful, and to help customers understand the value that it can bring for them in their deployment. So if you're somebody who's perhaps not so familiar with SharePoint, and not so familiar with the authorization policy servers and the concept of externalization of authorization, then this presentation should help you to understand what's happening in that domain and in the context of SharePoint to articulate it to customers. So we just have a short presentation to set the context around SharePoint and the way SharePoint security works before explaining what the product itself does, and then moving on to a demo to help you see concretely what it looks like. So what's the problem domain? Microsoft SharePoint is a piece of enterprise software, so it plays in the enterprise. So we have a company with a typical varied user population, perhaps some mobile employees, perhaps partners coming to do business or offer bids or tenders to the enterprise. In their daily work, they'll be supported by a set of business applications, for example, doing HR, doing ERP, doing financial, doing analytics, and perhaps a set of custom applications tailored for their particular business needs. Those applications and the users are also supported by typically a rich set of hardware and software infrastructural components. Things like, for example, Active Directory, enterprise directories, databases, messaging systems, increasingly mobile is of interest, and other software infrastructural components. The enterprise will typically interact with cloud-based services. So, for example, a CRM system from Salesforce, or calendaring, documents, potentially mail from Google, maybe some Windows 365 or hosted services in Windows. So this is a typical environment where SharePoint will come to play. And SharePoint is positioned as a platform to facilitate collaboration between users as they go about their tasks. Collaboration takes the form of sharing documents on websites, sharing resources to facilitate a flow of information. Now, anywhere where we have this sort of environment where we have a varied user population sharing data from different systems, it's clearly a very rich a domain very rich with identity management use cases. So let's go on and look a bit deeper into SharePoint and the way its security model works. Here's a sketch of the structure of typical SharePoint deployment. We have a farm, which is a concept of more to do with infrastructure like servers and databases and guaranteeing high availability and so on. It's more at that level. Within the farm, we will have hosted a set of web applications. Think of a web application as just a container. It's really a container. Now within that container, we'll have a set of site collections. And within a given collection, we will have a set of sites, linked hierarchically, typically. Now the kinds of things we're storing here are documents. We store SharePoint lists, which is a way to bring in remote data sources, for example, tables from a database, and present a view of that into SharePoint. We have web parts, which are kind of small pieces of functionality, perhaps tasks or calendaring or integrations around perhaps an org view or white pages potentially, based either on out-of-the-box components from SharePoint or actually developed in a custom fashion. So these are the kinds of things, this is a very quick view into what SharePoint looks like. To this set of resources we will have users coming who are organized in groups, and via permissions they're granted access to the resources. They will need to authenticate, and classically it supports native Windows ASP.NET forms-based authentication. And then just to mention, the security model is quite hierarchically oriented, so you tend to inherit permissions down from one site to another. This is to help just reduce the management overhead of managing access permissions within SharePoint. The permission set within SharePoint actually is quite fine-grained and goes beyond just simply create, delete, read, and write. But for our purposes, it's enough to understand what a permission is. Now, this is all well and good, and this is the current let's say the situation prior to 2010. So let's just sketch that up a bit. We have SharePoint deployment, we have resources, users and groups, we have an internal authorization model. Okay. Now, if we think back to the example of trying to integrate HR or CRM data or analytics data into SharePoint, we can't. It's not feasible to imagine that each of those systems would have its own custom way to expose its own users and roles and identities and security information about who can access what to SharePoint. You just couldn't do it. The only really feasible solution to this is to provide a single point of entry to SharePoint in a standards-based fashion, so that any component wishing to expose data in a secure fashion to SharePoint can go by the same mechanism. Now, fortunately, the industry over the last several years has spent all the time developing just these kind of standards around, the WS Star standards around SAML, and standards around XACML and so on. We don't need to go into the details of that at the moment. We just need to know that SharePoint has provided a way for us to make use of those technologies to declare our identity securely to SharePoint. Using the secure STS, the secure token service. And this is a SharePoint component. Equally, SharePoint can now expose that identity if it needs to consume services from other systems that can consume these tokens, these secure tokens. Now, they've added this. They've added as a way to augment the authorization model itself, the ability for SharePoint to consume claims from claims providers. So this could be things like, for example, something asserting, if it wasn't provided at authentication time, perhaps something that was needed to in a particular case, to find your age, or to find where you were a resident, or where you were a citizen, or if you paid your bill, or if whatever it happened to be, some additional claim required to authorize you. They've now provided a way for us to make that information available to SharePoint. So that's great. Microsoft have done a good job of providing these single points, standards-based points of integration with SharePoint. But that doesn't solve our problem, which, as identity management people, dealing with a heterogeneous set of systems within our enterprise, because those systems need to generate that token to provide it to SharePoint. So how are they going to do that? Well, some of them may well be able to do it natively, but we need probably a generic piece of infrastructure that will solve that problem for us. And this is where we can have APS for SharePoint will come, because using its STS token generation, it will hide a lot of the authentication and group and role membership calculations from SharePoint, consume that information from these end systems like enterprise directories or Active Directory or databases, and then make that available in a standards-based fashion for SharePoint. Equally, on the claims provider side, it will do the same thing, taking the data from various systems and generating standards-based token to support SharePoint. And then the other piece of integration that's been done in APS for SharePoint is to integrate with this so-called IMP piece, which is the Information Management Policy piece of SharePoint, which is a way, and we'll see that in the demo to make it concrete, but it's a way to augment access control by making use of document metadata to determine whether users have got access to those documents. Okay, so that's where Quest APS fits in. So we can proceed to a demo to make this more concrete. We will be showing authenticating to SharePoint using the APS STS, using non-AD identities, using a claims provider to augment the authorization model. We'll show the information management policy piece of controlling access to documents. And then we'll reiterate the importance and the significance of really what we've achieved with this in terms of the benefits that are brought by externalizing security policy.